In today's activity, you're going to figure out which species of frogs are found in a pond by listening to their calls. Scientists use words to help them remember different frog calls. You already know one example of this. Ribbit. That's the word scientists use to describe the call of the Pacific chorus frog. But here's another example. Listen to the American bullfrog. Some say that the bullfrog sounds like he's saying grum, grum, grum. You're going to listen to 5 different frogs. Each time you hear a frog call, you'll write down a couple of words to help you remember the sound. Then you'll...
Okay, so I need you to grab a piece of paper or the back of an envelope. You're not going to turn this in. This is just something you're going to do for the activity. And so you're going to write these types of frogs on the side of your paper. So the first one is a wood frog. So write down wood frog. The second one is a spring peeper. Spring peeper, P-E-E-P-E-R. The third one is bullfrog, B-U-L-L-F-R-O-G. The fourth one is a northern leopard frog. Northern, N-O-R-T-H-E-R-N. Leopard, L-E-O-P-A-R-D. Frog. And the last one is an American toad, T-O-A-D. So I'm going to let you listen to each of these frogs for a couple seconds, and you're going to write a word that describes what they sound like next to the name.
Now you're going to learn what wood frogs sound like. I'll play you a recording, listen to it, and then talk with your group about what words could describe the sound. Write down a few words to help you remember the sound. Are you ready? Here we go. Here's the sound of wood frogs.
Okay, make sure you wrote a word to describe what the wood frog sounds like.
All right, now it's time for spring peepers. Listen to the sound, then talk with your group and write down a few words to help you remember the sound. Here's the sound of spring peepers.
Okay, write down a word that describes the sound that the spring peeper makes.
All right, next is the sound of American bullfrogs. Listen to this and then talk with your group and write down a few words to help you remember the sound. Here we go.
Okay, make sure you wrote down a word to describe what the American bullfrog sounds like. Earlier, he said that he thinks it sounds like grum, grum, but you can write down whatever you want.
Now we'll listen to the sound of the northern leopard frog. Listen to it and then talk with your group and write down a few words to help you remember the sound. Here's the leopard frog.
Okay, write down a word that describes what the northern leopard frog sounds like.
All right, listen to the sound of the American toad. Then talk with your group about the sound and write down a few words to help you remember the sound. Here's the American toad.
Okay, write down a word that describes what the American toad sounds like.
All right, here's a challenge. Challenge number 1. Let's practice to see if you can recognize what frog is calling. Look at your frog calls list and listen to the call. What frog is calling? Talk to your group and fill in question number 2 on your worksheet. All right, here's a challenge.
Okay, so your challenge was to figure out which frog was making that noise.
Okay, are you ready for the answer? Challenge number 1 was a spring peeper. I don't know what words you use to describe its sound, but personally, I thought it sounded a bit like cheep or peep. Okay, let's practice one more. Are you ready for challenge number 2? Look at your frog calls list and listen to the call. What frog is calling? Talk to your group and fill in question number 3 on your worksheet. Here's the sound.
Okay, do you think you know which frog that was? Let's see if you're right.
Okay, are you ready for the answer? Challenge number 2 was a northern leopard frog. Now, I don't know what words you used to describe the sound, but personally, I thought it sounded a bit like it was growling.
Okay, so the next challenge is a little bit more difficult. They have recorded sounds in Oakwood Pond, and you're going to listen to the sounds and check off the frogs you hear in Oakwood Pond. So you're going to have to listen really carefully.
Now let's try an even more difficult challenge. You're going to listen to the sounds of the frogs at Oakwood Pond at night. Now, there are 2 different kinds of frogs calling at the same time. That's what makes this hard. Listen and talk with your group. On your worksheet, check off the frogs you hear in question number 4.
Okay, so you don't have a worksheet. You're just going to have to look at the list that you made of the different frogs and the sounds they make, and just put a check or an X next to the 2 that you hear.
Here's the sounds.
Okay, so there were 2. Hopefully you picked 2 that you heard.
Okay, are you ready for the answer? I heard wood frogs and spring peepers. Listen again. Can you hear them? Those are the spring peepers. And then right there, those are wood frogs.
All right, now we're going to do an even tougher challenge, the last one. This is Swede Lake, and you're going to check off the frogs you hear at Swede Lake.
Now you're going to listen to the frogs that live in Swede Lake at night. Listen and talk with your group. On your worksheet, check off the frogs that you hear in question 4. Here are the sounds. Okay, are you ready for the answer? I heard spring peepers, American bullfrogs, northern leopard frogs, and American toads. Let's listen together and see if you can hear all those frogs. Here we go. That's the sound of American toads. There's the American bullfrog. Do you hear that? Those are some spring peepers. Haha, that's the sound of the northern leopard frog. Discuss.
So what place has more kinds of frogs, Oakwood Pond or Swede Lake? And what evidence do you have?
Discuss. Discuss. Then go to the next slide to watch the final video.
Can you think of any reasons why Swede Lake has more frogs?
Discuss. Then go to the next slide to watch the final video. Discuss. Then go to the...
So on the worksheet, it would have had this, but you can read this on here. It says that Oakwood Pond in spring, this tiny pond is a shallow puddle in the woods. In summer, it dries up. There are no flowing streams or swamps here. In Swede Lake, it says this lake has swampy places with many plants, places with shallow water, streams flowing into the lake. There's water here all year long.
When you did the activity, you learned to identify different kinds or species of frogs from the sounds that they make. Sounds that scientists like to describe with words like ribbit for the Pacific chorus frog or grump for the American bullfrog. Then you compared the sounds of frogs from two different places to figure out which place had more species of frogs. You probably found out that Swede Lake has more species of frogs than Oakwood Pond. Why would that be? You might think it's just because the lake was bigger, but it's not just that the lake was bigger. It had a lot of different kinds of places that were just right for many different species of frogs. There were a lot more places for frogs to choose from. For example, it had muddy places for frogs that like to be in muddy areas. It had places like this for frogs that like warm, calm, shallow water. And it had places for frogs that like swampy areas too. Oakwood Pond had fewer choices. It was smaller. It just had shallow water. And here's another big difference. Oakwood Pond is only wet during the spring when there's a lot of rain. By summertime, the pond dries up. Swede Lake is much bigger, so it doesn't dry up in the summer. It's wet all year long. It turns out how wet a place is makes a big difference for frogs. Remember how we found out that frogs are calling because male frogs are trying to attract females to lay eggs together? Well, frogs can only lay their eggs in wet places. Have a closer look at frog eggs. Frog eggs look a lot like a big ball of jelly. They're the kind of eggs that have to be in the water or else they'll dry out. Plus, when the eggs hatch, out come tadpoles, and tadpoles have to swim in the water. So, since frogs need water for laying eggs and hatching tadpoles, there are usually more species of frogs in places that stay wet all year. That's why there were more frogs in Swede Lake than in Oakwood Pond. Oakwood Pond and Swede Lake are two different places where frogs could live. Scientists call them two different habitats. For frogs, some habitats are better than others, so you'll find more species of frogs in some places. Swede Lake was a little bit better than Oakwood Pond, but the best habitat in the world for frogs is actually here, in the Amazon rainforest. There are over 400 species of frogs found in the Amazon. The reason for that is because there are so many places for frogs to live. In the Amazon, there are frogs like this that live on the ground. There are frogs like this that live high up on the leaves in the trees. And all kinds of other frogs living throughout the rainforest. The tropical rainforest is the richest habitat in the world, overflowing with all kinds of amazing and interesting species of frogs. Some of them scientists haven't even discovered yet. Try to find out what frogs live near you. Have fun and stay curious.